Hello, it's time for Combat Patrol Carnage. Hello and welcome to this special episode of Combat Patrol Carnage. So in this episode I'm going to take a look at our first 2 complete combat patrols, so that's our first 20 issues of the magazine. I'll include all the magazine content, my thoughts on what we get inside of course, all the models, the paints, the paintbrushes and our first few subscriber gifts as well. I won't be including anything premium, this is just going to be a look at the base subscription for those of you who subscribe. And you can easily overlook the subscription gifts if you are just a collector from picking up in store. So yeah, this is going to be a fun little look at the entire collection so far up to issue 20. So before we hit the table, don't forget to do all the usual. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment down below. If you've liked this video, do let me know and I'll try to do more. Plan to do one hopefully for every time we get 2 new complete combat patrols set up. So every 20 issues. Just a nice sort of roundup of the collection so far. Finally then, don't forget Combat Patrol Carnage is proudly sponsored by warbay.shop, your one-stop supply for all your hobby needs. They stock everything from new and used models for various different armies and game systems, to all your hobby supplies and your gaming equipment as well. They're also stockists of partworks, including Combat Patrol, so if you want to check out, there's a link for them in the video description. Just go to Other Games and then Hachette Partworks and they'll have a list of all the magazines they have available for you. Right, with that said, let's hit the table and get this review underway. So here we are then with our complete collection up to issue 20. So I've got all 20 issues across the back, our game mat, our tape measure, all our little cutout tokens, our sets of data cards. So I've got them bagged up with Tyranids, Space Marines, and then sort of gaming essentials and terrain cards. We've got our 2 complete combat patrols plus our bonus models. So we've got the Tyranid one, with our 20 Termagants, the Tyranid Prime, 3 Von Rhein's Leapers, the Parasite of Mortrex, the Psychophage, and the Barb Gaunts. Our Space Marine side has the Captain in Terminator Armour, Librarian in Terminator Armour, Chaplain on Bike, 5 Infernus Marines, 5 Terminators, a Teleport Homer, and our bonus Sergeant for the Infernus Squad. We also have just at the back there 12 dice, which came with issues 1 and 5. And we've got our paints so far, which I believe are about 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 paints so far. And we've got our paintbrushes, so our subscriber gift paintbrushes, a small layer, a dry and a large base. Then our ones we've had in the magazine so far, a medium base and our starter brush. So other subscriber gifts then are a mug, which we have just recently received of our 6th delivery. Our tool set, which came with our 1st delivery, binder, which came with our 3rd delivery, and of course the paintbrush set, which came with the 4th. So yeah, quite an impressive collection just for the 20 issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the individual combat patrols into 3 sections. There's going to be a look over the combat patrol, my thoughts on the colour schemes the magazine has gone for, and where to go to next. I'll even throw some pictures up of models I think would be ideal to add to your Tyranids collection. So yeah, parts 1 and 2. Part 1 is going to be a patrol overview for both the patrols. Part 2 is going to be a look at the hobby supplies. And then part 3, all our gaming equipment. And then finally, the part 4 is my final overview for looking at magazine contents, etc. So I'm going to try and stick to the script. So here we go. So part 1, Combat Patrols Overview. So first off, let's look at the Tyranids. So the Tyranid Patrol is a very, very stereotypical Tyranid Horde patrol force. Loads of little critters. So as I said, we've got 20 termagants with ripper swarms and 5 barb gaunts, backed up by your big beastie, your synapse creatures, and even some vanguard organisms as well. So the addition of the parasite Mortrex gives you a little bit of flexibility and some more dedicated anti-infantry stuff. The only thing this combat patrol does lack is any form of anti-tank, so it's probably going to struggle when we get some of the bigger stuff later on in the collection. So the colour scheme, I must admit, has grown on me over the course of the magazine, but I'm not the biggest fan of the Baraknar Burgundy. I much prefer the brighter purple that Leviathan should be. This is my Winged Tyranid Prime from my Leviathan box set. And he was painted, I believe I did him 2 layers of Luxian purple, contrast paint, shade of Nuln oil to get a little bit darker, and then I highlighted it with Genestealer purple and Xeris purple as well before the Genestealer purple. So yeah, I definitely kind of prefer that. So here's a sort of a side by side, so you can see what the magazine's done a little differently. My wings are just Fire Slayer flesh with a dry brush of Cadian flesh tone. Whereas the wings we've got here, Squig orange, and it does show. But yeah, as I said, the Combat Patrol colour scheme has grown on me. I think it's going to be a nice changeover, and it'll look good once we've finished. I've already made the 3D terrain cards, which I used the guide from the Premium Kit 1 for the Hive Tyrant to finish off and get everything up to the perm level standard. But yeah, the paint guide is very fitting, goes along with all the previous paint guides they've done for Leviathan since the launch of Leviathan. All the starter sets, paint sets, etc. have all done the Baraknar Burgundy. I believe 1 or 2 did do Naggaroth Night, but that soon got swapped over, I think. Yeah, it works. As a nice cohesive force, it looks really good. So where would you go next? A lot of it depends on the Hive fleet you've chosen and even personal preferences. So personally for me, I'd definitely add some warrior organisms. We don't have winged warriors anymore. Sadly, these shrikes have gone the way of the dodo. Would be nice if they brought them back. It gives them a bit more of an elite choice over the flying gargoyles. But yeah, definitely some warriors to help add the synapse and add a bit more punch to your force. The setup I've got for my warriors are Lash Whip, Bone Sword, and Death Spitter. Very all-rounded sort of equipment. After that, I think the force definitely needs some muscle, so I'd definitely add a Carnifex or 2. Classic Tyranid big beastie, looks really good and are brutal on the tabletop. After that, if you have premium, you already have a Hive Tyrant / Swarm Lord. But if you haven't gone for the premium, you definitely want to add one of those. They are one of the best leader beasts you can get and one of your best synaptic creatures you can get, and they have a lot of psychic powers and add a lot to the force. Finally then, you can flesh out the horde by getting more termagants, barb gaunts, and even adding some close combat in the form of a unit or 2 of hormigaunts. That should bring the force roughly to just over 1,000 points. I think I'll need to do some maths. Another thing I probably would add, a couple of biovores. They're really good for launching mines from the backfield. They'll sit back with your barb gaunts quite nicely and fit in well with them. Alright, moving on then to the Space Marines. So the Space Marine Patrol is a small and elite force, just like the Astartes should be. Sadly though, the force lacks a tactical linchpin as there are no battle line units in this patrol. While Combat Patrol doesn't tell us the importance of battle line units until issue 22 when we start looking at the full rules, it does mean the Space Marines will have to be more aggressive in trying to deny your opponents their scoring units by taking them out in range or melee. Yeah, this is definitely a really tight and elite force, and definitely going to benefit from having some extra units thrown in. So painting the Space Marine force is pretty bog standard. It's your quintessential Ultramarine force, so it's a nice, easy to follow colour scheme that's easy to replicate over a larger army. Plus, it's quite easy to change out certain colours to swap in for your other specific chapters. Luckily, with the collection colours we have so far, you could go Blood Angels if you wanted to, with the Mephiston Red. You could go Silver Templars with Lead Belcher. We're getting yellow in another couple of issues, so that'll help with your shoulder pads. Could even go White Scars, Black Templars. There's a whole host of chapters you could go. If you wanted to, use Wraithbone and go Deathwing with a First Company Dark Angel force. Simply swapping colours. The paint guides are very handy, teaching you all the basics at least of how to paint your models. I'm hoping things in the future will get a little better and more intricate, which we'll cover more towards the end of this video. So where would you go next? Personally, I'd definitely add a couple of battle line units. A squad of intercessors and a squad of assault intercessors will definitely give you a much needed tactical linchpin to help with holding your objectives, and even in the form of the assault intercessors, taking the fight to the enemy. Other than that, you have a good amount of characters, so you don't really need to add anything. If you want to add something for the chaplain to go with, definitely grab yourself some Outriders and maybe an Invader ATV to take maximum power use of the new combined squad that they form. In the premium collection, we already have a Brutalis Dreadnought, adding some absolute chunk into the collection, but I would definitely suggest adding a Redemptor or a Brutalis of your particular choice, whichever you choose, whether you want to go ranged or melee. And then to round things off, you definitely want to take some form of tank, whether a Repulsor Executioner, or even the humble Predator replacing Gladiator. So there we have it, and again that should roughly take you to 1,000, maybe just over, depending on how big you make your squads. But yeah, it gives you variety, which is the importance for any army really. Moving on, part 2, looking at the hobby supplies. So the hobby supplies we've got so far have mostly been paints, and most of those have been base paints, with the exception of our one layer paint, Squig Orange. The only downside is, if you haven't been a subscriber and you've been collecting through the magazine, we have only had 2 brushes. A standard brush, starter brush, which has, as you can see, already started to go thin and sort of wavy. It used to be quite thick when we first had it, but yeah, it's definitely worn out. And the only other brush we've had is the medium base brush, which is still holding its shape, but it's definitely absorbing the colour from the paints we've used. Luckily though, subscribers would have had some extra bonus brushes, so we got the large base brush, which has come in handy for painting our larger models. The small layer brush is definitely going to help for picking out the detail, as I've done on the Terminators, etc. We haven't come to dry paints and dry brushing yet, but hopefully in the near future, once we've added shades to our Tyranids, we might learn about dry brushing or even relayering, and that could come in handy for those. There's certainly a lot to come. Most of the paint guides, as I've mentioned, have been rather basic, a little repetitive as well. The only other gripe I have is that all our colours have been solid paints. We haven't had any shades yet. Previous part works we had shades in, I think it was like issue 15 or 16 with Imperium. So we was able to start learning about adding depth to our models. We don't get shades now until I believe it's issue 25. Just after the Eldar Guardians, we get our first 2 shade paints and a shade brush, which is non-oil, and Carabog Crimson plus a STC shade brush. It's going to be good. It's going to help add depth to our Tyranids and our Space Marines at least, and even our Eldar models. So yeah, definitely things are looking to be a slow start, but hopefully we'll pick up soon in the next 20 issues, as we are getting obviously more paints, 2 new combat patrols to add and paint as well. All in all, it's been a good start. Just things could have been a little better. Maybe adding 1 or 2 shade paints in a early issue. I think if we'd started with a shade paint early on, even if it's just Carabog Crimson so we can shade our Tyranids, it would make them a little more visibly appealing. But it is what it is. It's how they've wanted the magazine to play out, so it can't be helped. So with that said, moving on to Part 3, Gaming Supplies. The gaming supplies we've had so far, interesting and certainly better than what we've had in previous magazines. It is a downgrade from previous magazines where we've had physical terrain, but it has meant that they can include lots more actual models and allow us to sort of use our imagination to bring to life the battlefield. So we've got a picture of a giant Tyranid growth. It's up to our imagination to imagine just how much that Tyranid growth is going to block things. The rules have been a little confusing. Some say you can see through the terrain, some say you can't, some say you can move over, some say you can't. But yeah, the stuff we had with the first set of cards are all blocking pieces of terrain, so you can't move through it, but you can fly over it with our Parasite and Tyranid Prime. The newer stuff is scalable terrain. It will reduce your movement, but you can move over it, which is good. That's the stuff we had with issue 15, which I've just realised we can't see the number of. A little bit better. Other than that, most of our other gaming supplies has been tokens, which we've had to photocopy and cut out. Dice have been only 12, 2 sets of 6, one of issue 1, one set of issue 5. Not ideal. We are definitely going to need more. It's okay if you picked up multiple copies of issue 1 or even issue 5. If you're lucky enough, you've got some extra dice. But I'd say you definitely want around 20 at least for most units. When it comes to units like the Terminators that have lots of attacks but different weapon profiles, you can simply roll your Sergeant's attacks first and then do all your Power Fist attacks first, even if you only have 20 dice. Other than that, I have really liked the terrain cards. All of our stat cards have been quite nice. We even have Combat Patrol rule cards, which is very helpful. Saves having to print things off at least, which is the only other way you can get all the rules for these Combat Patrols is to download and print off from the 40k website, Warhammer community and downloads page. The fact that they are actually physical cards is a lot better. Yeah, handy. We have a turn breakdown card, which is handy, but I still forget things. I always do. I get tunnel vision badly. But yeah. I would prefer if we did have the 3D terrains, but I know what they've done. They've done some nice, really custom stuff, which I have done 3D images of myself, using actual model components. We only have 1 playmat for the moment, more if you have picked up multiples of issue 1 like I have. So we only have officially half the size of a full Combat Patrol board. We will get the full size one once we hit issue 20 of the Farseer, who brings us our second playmat. Objectives, pretty basic, just flat discs of 40mm. And yeah, the tokens are handy. I think I would have preferred it if we had wound markers with perhaps quantity of skulls. So say 2 corners were 1 skull tokens, another corner was 2 skull tokens. That would have been better, saves having so many tokens floating around. Considering going to dice for anything with more than 5 wounds, I think, in the future. I've got loads of D10s and D8s, etc., so they'll come in handy for stuff like that. But that's pretty much it for gaming supplies. It definitely helps having the cards, saves having your full pages floating around. When it was Imperium, I made mini codexes by getting some treasury tags and grouping together the rules for the Adeptus Mechanicus, This is a Battle, Space Marines, and the Necrons. Necrons I had to do into 2 because the treasury tags couldn't quite handle all the pages we had. But yeah, it was fun. It's a nice little thing. But yeah, definitely takes up a lot of space. These cards, they're small, about less than A5, I think. So yeah, they don't take up a lot of space. As you've seen on my board, my table here, which is a 3x4, I can fit the 1 mat plus all the tokens and all the data cards and still have space for dice and stuff sitting around. So, right, that's that. Moving on to our final stage then. So, part 4, magazine content and final thoughts so far. So we're going to start by looking at the contents of the magazine. Throughout the magazine, we've had some good stuff. They've been nice because they've been very focused on our first 2 combat patrols. There's been very little that's sort of looking at different armies, which a lot of Imperium did. It jumped to and from different factions so much. It didn't even give it to us in order. Yeah, from what I've seen of issues 21 and 22, this is going to be the norm going forward. We're starting to look at the Eldari quite a lot, with a lot of background on the Eldari. And we're even starting to look at the Immaterium, the galaxy as a whole, which is going to be pretty fun as well. Stories then. So yeah, the story's been fun. From small one-offs to our continuing saga of Sergeant Askerton. They've all been great reads. And again, they've mostly been focused on generic Imperial worlds and often involving Space Marines and or Tyranids. They've been fun to read, and yeah, could definitely go with more stories in the future, I think. As I previously mentioned, the paint guides have been okay. They've been basic. The more recent ones, issues 16 onwards, where we now have quite a lot of paints in our collection, have been a lot more detailed, and going forward into the issues 21 and 22, they're going to be a lot more detailed again. The Farseer one is incredibly detailed. There's lots of colours to apply. 22 even gives us 2 new paints, Avalan Sunset and Catachan Flesh, so we're picking out yellows and browns now. And once that issue drops and I get my spare Farseer and possibly even my spare Guardians, I'll be doing a bonus video for those of you interested. Possibly on Patreon, possibly will be available on YouTube, but I'll be doing a special paint guide on how to paint alternative craft worlds, utilising the colours we get in a magazine. Collect articles, they're always nice. They add a lot of personality to our units. We had them in Imperium. Well, it's nice that they give us like character naming pages, but it'd be nice if they just gave us generic unit titles. Issue 3, when we got our first Space Marine squad, they also Space Marine naming article even. They also gave us a generic naming table for the squad, so you could either name it using the D3 table for the squad or making up your own, whichever you choose. It's definitely nice when it came to Terminators. We got to choose the first part and the second part of the name with no tables to roll on other than a little bit of unit background, which is nice, adds a little bit of flavour to the unit and how you'd expect them to play in battles. So yeah, all in all, they're quite fun, nice to go back to. I've actually made a list on a piece of paper just for quick reference of all my different unit names. I'm going to do it into all the other combat patrols as well. Finally then, rules. So this is probably the downside to the collection so far. The rules have been higgledy-piggledy. They've given us some rules, then they've contradicted those rules. Yeah, it's been confusing. I've had to go back several times to read over certain rules. I'm hoping when we come to issue 22 and we start looking at the full core rules, we will get some more sort of updated and clarified rules pages. I will say the scenarios have been fun, even if they have had the odd error in places. I believe one issue, I think it was 17, didn't have the barb gaunts in the list, but it had the barb gaunts in the playthrough. And watching Tabletop Donkey's playthrough, it definitely paid to have the barb gaunts in that force, adding something extra to Tyranids, because it's kind of one-sided almost. Mind you, most of the fights when you have Terminators on your side, it's going to be a one-sided fight. The only downside is we have been given the faction rules, but we don't actually start learning these till issue 25 when we get the Space Marine rules, and then it's not until issue 28 when we get the Tyranid rules. So we can use them if we want, but we haven't officially been told to start using them by the magazine. And that's kind of how I'm doing my games at the moment. I'm doing everything as the magazine sort of dictates. Hopefully though, by the time we reach issue 30, we will be able to make more use of all the data cards and faction abilities and stuff we have. We have 2 full playmats by then, so we'll also be able to start playing more full Combat Patrol sized games. By the time we hit issue 30, we will have the basic Eldari Combat Patrol, which is the Farseer, Guardians, Wraithlord, and the Wind Riders. So we'll actually have 3 complete combat patrols by that point, which is going to be very helpful. It means we can start playing games versus different forces. Well, the basic combat patrol is actually a pretty good one anyway. The jet bikes are fast and maneuverable, ideal for taking central objectives early on. The Guardians can sit back and shoot with all the different guns and their weapon platform, and the Farseer just adds some extra power abilities with its psychic powers and benefits to units. Plus that Wraithlord is an absolute beast in combat and shooting. It's tooled up with all the different various guns you can expect a Wraithlord can take. I believe it's got Bright Lance and Ghost Glaive, which is pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to building and painting that guy. So with that said, that's it. Finally then, we're going to give you my sort of summary final thoughts. So in a summary, as an introduction into the hobby and setting, I can't fault the magazine. But as someone with 15 plus years experience in the hobby, the guides are very basic and sort of infuriating, especially when you get repetitive and slow given information. As I previously mentioned, I would have preferred it if we'd been asked to wait until a later issue to start adding more colours, or even once we reach a later issue be told to go back to previous guides in order to finish off our models. But it is what it is. It's how they want to do it. They want to make sure they don't give too much. They want to give a nice even spread of hobby, lore, and gaming articles throughout each issue, though issue 20 has been a pure dedicated build and paint to the Chaplain issue. The only other thing, the information we've been given has been sometimes wrong, sometimes a little too late to what we've been needing. The repetitive of the guides, mostly the Tyranids, has been getting a bit boring. It's always slap 3 coats of Wraithbone on, slap Baraknar Burgundy on, slap black, slap orange, etc. Space Marines, yeah, I know you can't do too much different. But we do have 2 different units. You've got more basic sort of troop units with not a lot of details, and then you've got a more elite unit with lots of details. So there's definitely warrant for different guides for those, which is very nice. With the Tyranids though, it's all very samey. They have tried to make it different with the guns. So the Barb Gaunts have red, the Termagants have orange guns. it's at least making things a little different and more visually pleasing. But looking at the rules, it's been very watered down for the moment. We are going to get full rules, but that's not going to be until issue 22, when we start looking at the basic core rules within the magazine, and we can start playing full-size Combat Patrol games. Hopefully, though, future issues will clarify and introduce to us the rules in much better wordings. Definitely going to be an interesting thing to look forward to in the future. But other than that, the only other thing I can say is, as I previously mentioned too, there has been a lot of errors in this magazine. Even after 4 Warhammer partworks, we are still seeing errors either in missions and army setups in the scenarios, or even wrong typings of words in some of the articles. I think majority of it, though, has been in the gameplay sections, so Hachette really needs to hire proofreaders. I know they get a lot of this information direct from Games Workshop, so maybe something gets lost in translation, perhaps. Perhaps somebody's forgetting to write down a certain unit in a certain place, but adds it in at a certain other place. We're not too sure, but it could really do with somebody on either side of the fence to proofread this magazine before it goes to the printer. So when it comes to the models, they've been the usual great quality that you can expect from Games Workshop. The only one exception I have to this has been the Parasite Amortrex, where for some reason, even after multiple hours of drying time, his tail has not wanted to bond to the base. It got to the point where I ended up having to clip off all the melted plastic, leaving his tail thin in one position, which I could have probably done with putting some green stuff on to fix it. But I ended up pinning him down to the base, so it's not really noticeable. You sort of can see it from an angle, but yeah, from majority of the views you can't tell he's actually had half his tail cut off. Other than that, I've really enjoyed the models. They've gone together just as all the previous models I've built, and yeah, they have been pretty good quality, really good models, and have been fun to paint. All in all, though, it has been a good start to the collection, and I can really see it only getting better. Issue 21 and 22, if those are things to go on for how things are going to get in the future, I'm really liking those 2 issues. The Farseer paint guide is really in-depth, much like the Chaplain on Bike one. The update paint guide for issue 22, where we get our 2 new paints, is very good. It focuses on every different faction and most models that need additional bits of detail. So we look at stuff like leather straps on our Terminators, the straps on the Chaplain's van braces, the belts on all our Infernus Marines. It adds the eyes to all our Termagants and Tyranid models. And yeah, they are definitely starting to up the quality of their guides, so definitely looking forward to future issues with different armies. Hopefully once we hit the later issues in the collection towards the end of this year and into next year, things will definitely ramp up more and more. I'm certainly looking forward to most of the combat patrols, even some of those that I've not really been bothered by, especially looking at Leagues of Votann and World Eaters. Yeah, Leagues of Votann are just pretty much Space Marines but smaller. And World Eaters, despite the fact I like being aggressive in games, I don't really like Khorne for some reason. It's weird, I like to be aggressive, yet I hate using aggressive focused armies. Maybe once we get it and start playing with it, I might find like for them. But yeah, I'm looking forward though to the Emperor's Children myself coming out in March. So yeah, finally then a round off then. That's all I can really say for this collection and journey so far. The future does look bright, even if the far future is grimdark. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the future issues and the future combat patrols. So Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've enjoyed the collection so far, and I hope you'll join me all the way to issue 90. So all that's left to do is to say thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time on more Combat Patrol Carnage! Goodbye.